But I am Louise Wilson. I'm a school nurse in Beaver Dam, which is about 45 minutes from here. I am currently the president of the Wisconsin Association of School Nurses. I've done this presentation on 504 accommodations, and I myself learn things new each time. One of the things I've been a school nurse, this is my 21st year of being a school nurse. I think it's a really exciting time to be a school nurse. When I saw and have worked with Teresa with Watson and her resources, I think it's amazing because there's all kinds of resources. I want to apologize for kind of butting in and putting my 2 cents worth in when you guys are asking questions, but I really struggle and feel a lot of empathy for you, because when I started 20 years ago, there wasn't any resources, and some of the things that she's talking about, that you can go there and get checklists and things like that. I remember we were just past the dittos, okay, and we had typewriters. We didn't even have computers. So I was cutting and pasting pictures of things from my nursing books and trying to come up with, checklists and how to train people how to do catheterizations and that. So I think it's really amazing that we've got all these resources, but I also really understand where you're coming from. And one of my first projects when I was a school nurse is I made an orientation manual, because I thought, if I die, I don't want anybody to have to go through what I did to learn about school nursing and what school nursing was. So I think it's really nice that DPI has this orientation that you can sit down, and I know it's kind of overwhelming, and what I'm going to be talking about is probably extremely overwhelming to you, that if you're just like this is your second month, and some of you even if it's your second year. I just want to explain a couple things. My slides are really full of information, and I don't expect to read them. I'm hopefully not going to read them myself as I go through them and just explain. But the reason I have them there is that it's very complicated, and there are things that you can go back to later then and look and see. And what's very fascinating, as the DPI person talked about, there's lots of resources, and she cut and pasted from interpretations of the law. And when you look at 504, and if you Google it, everybody cuts and pastes from everybody else's works, because there's just interpretations. And I actually, on that sheet I gave you, came across 2013 interpretation from the Department of Education on 504. So there's some new interpretations of how they've interpreted 504. So I wanted you to have that resource. So the website is on one of those slides. And then from that, I, this morning even, added some other slides to my presentation. So as we go through, there might be an extra slide. But I think I got all of them on that one sheet, and a couple of you, I'm going to have to email that to you. But you'll see some of those slides too, so that you have that information. Because again, what you'll probably be doing is going back through those resources, looking at them, thinking about how you interpret it. What my slides are going to do is I'm going to kind of build. So I'm going to ask you to hold questions until the end, because maybe by then you'll have had the information. So I'm going to kind of start off how I learned about 504, give you a basic round, kind of keep building, keep building, keep building. So that's kind of my plan, and I hope that works okay for you. How many of you have sat in on a 504 team? Yeah, so some of you have, okay. How many of you knew what you were supposed to be doing? Okay, all right, all right. Or even have the paperwork, okay. So this is what I'm going to do. Again, I'm going to review the legislation, talk about it, describe the process, and then hopefully give you some really good ideas of what you would do. So if you get called, and the next time you go in, you'll know what you're supposed to be doing. Again, 504 is part of the Rehabilitation Act. Okay, it's federal law to protect against discrimination. So it's not an educational law. Okay. It's a federal discrimination law, and if you just, when you think about the difference between IDA, that we just heard about, and then 504, 504 really has nothing, and I say that tongue-in-cheek, to do with education, but it has everything to do with discrimination. So what you're really deciding is that you cannot discriminate against that student. Okay? They have to be able to access their education. So it's very much an anti-discrimination law. Okay? And again, you'll keep hearing these sentences, and I keep building up, but a handicapped person is one who has a record of, is regarded as having a record of a physical or mental impairment which substantially limits one or more of its life activities. Okay. Because it's a disability, it's broader than IDA. Okay, so we're going to go through those, and you'll see lists and lists and lists. And as it says on the slides, it's a non-inclusive list. So it'll list all these things, and you can think of anything more. So it's non-inclusive. Okay. Many students who are served under your individual health care plans could be 504. And this is where you'll see things being interpreted by any other school districts. Oh, which reminds me, on the sheet that I have the 504 quick reference card, please cross off the last sentence. Okay? And this is kind of a segue from your question. This was something that we kind of created as a quick reference for teachers when we went into a 504, because what's the difference? Why are we doing a 504 plan versus why aren't they being special ed? And this was how our school district did interpret it, that you couldn't provide special ed services. You couldn't have a special ed teacher. You couldn't do special ed things. You couldn't have that EEN teacher do something because the kid's not special ed. That's not true, but that's how our school district at one time interpreted it. We have a new proof of services director, looks at those EdGov question and answers and find out that yes, you can use your special ed staff to help a child that qualifies under a 504 plan. But again, some of that's individual interpretation from your school district. Okay, so in all reality, didn't you? Okay, is it in the packet? Okay, okay, okay. And so therefore, a lot of you and many more may be involved in 504. And again, as we go through this, you'll see why I say that. More school nurses more likely to be involved with a 504 plan than even an IEP or the special education. Okay, it was a string of anti-discrimination laws. Okay, this is important to note too. The Office of Civil Rights enforces the law, not DPI. Okay, so that's why Betty's not up here talking about it. That's why they don't have anybody. If you call DPI and ask them about a 504 plan, they'll say, we got to call the Office of Civil Rights. Okay, because they don't really have anything to do with it. Again, it doesn't have anything to do with education. It's anti-discrimination. Okay. When I was doing this a couple years ago, this slide meant more. It was redone in 2008 and went into effect in 2009. There were several changes. I think people are still, that's why a 2013 question and answer just came out, because people are still trying to digest the changes that went in effect in 2009. So you'll still have probably people in your school district that are kind of confused, know that there have been changes, still don't figure out what they did. But what happened in 2009 is that the categories went much broader. The interpretation of the law was that we really want to include everybody. Okay, so and one of the articles I was reading, the impetus for this was actually the returning veterans from the Gulf War. Okay, they were coming back, and we wanted to include all the different kind of disabilities, all the things that were happening to them. So they opened up this law, created a lot of different categories that you could qualify under. Didn't have any thought process, or little thought process probably, what that meant for schools. Okay, how it helps students then? If you're eligible, okay, then you're going to have accommodation plan, and it's usually called a 504 accommodation plan. It's written to eliminate barriers to accessing your public school programs, okay, and your extracurricular activities. So again, if you can access the same kind of programs, if you had a disability or if you didn't. Okay. Okay, and so then this is where people keep cutting and pasting, because this is what has to happen. You have to have a physical or mental impairment. It has to substantially limit one or more major life activities. You can have a record of such impairment, or in the law it says is regarded as having such impairment, such as people believe they have an impairment whether they do or not. Okay. That whether they do or not thing, again, was redefined in that 213. So if you look at the very last slide, there will be that resource. If you look at that, they talk about it a little bit more. If somebody is regarded as having a condition, like you think the student might have ADHD, has never been diagnosed, but he's, kind of off the wall, and people say, so you can't discriminate him against, and it says here, as I underlined, there's some negative action. They gave an example in one of those things, is that this only comes into play if you think they have a disability versus they truly have a disability, is if you discriminate against them. And one of the examples they gave was a student whose parent was an active AIDS activist, and so therefore the kids at the school thought that he had HIV, and so they were discriminating against him because they thought he had HIV. He doesn't have HIV, but just because he thought he had he would be protected under 504, even though he doesn't have a disability, but he was thought to have a disability. So if they were telling him that, no, you can't use the boys' locker room to change in because, you might have AIDS and HIV positive and something might happen to us, they could not do that. Okay? So that's where that has a record of an impairment. So it's only if it's negative, and that's something I think is new and people don't realize because they think like, okay, well, again, we can qualify them. And then again, just because they're a record, because you don't have to do a 504 plan. And again, you just have to make sure that you're not discriminating against them. So if you think they might have a disability, but they don't really have a disability, you don't have to do a 504 plan. Okay. Again, this is kind of what I was describing there with the HIV student. Okay, and this again, then where we talked about IDA, and you were kind of mentioning that in your question, a qualified student with a disability is protected, again, for discrimination, whether or not they need special education. Okay, so it doesn't matter if they would qualify under OHI or some of the other ones. Okay, so again, a student who has diabetes, who doesn't need special education, may qualify and be protected because they have a physical impairment that substantially limits major life activity, and of course you can jump to what that is, and we'll talk about some of those. So what is a physical or mental impairment? Again, it's an individual decision. It's not a category. So not everybody who has diabetes necessarily would. Not everybody who has a food allergy, not everybody who has Crohn's disease necessarily does. Just so it's not a category. But, and this is again why I cut and paste and why I have these things, it's all those things. It's defined as any physiological disorder or condition, cosmetic disfigurement, da-da-da-da-da. Okay? And again, this isn't an exhausted list, and you can read that, and you can read it on your slides and say, okay, so could somebody have one of those? Yep. Mental impairment. Okay? Again, all these things that are listed there. The DSM-4, I don't think 5's come out yet, is still a source, but just because it's listed there doesn't necessarily mean it's a disability or that it can constitute a mental impairment. Okay. Drugs and alcohol addiction, this is important. If they're currently using it, okay, and again, you can see how somebody might be impaired with a bodily function or a mental health impairment if they're currently using drugs. If they're currently using it, you can discriminate against them. Okay, if they're not currently using, then you can't discriminate against them. Okay, it's basically. All right. So then, major life activity. Again, we're looking at, it affects either what is a major life activity. Again, it includes all those things, and this is what happened in 2009. Then went in effect, and this is what threw people out because the law added things like reading, concentrating was in there, thinking, and communication. So reading, thinking, communication, and even concentrating, you can see how school districts were really alarmed about that. So if that's a major life activity and whatever is going on with that student affects that major life activity, then gosh, we might have to do a 504 plan on them. Okay. Now, if that's not enough, if you can't find something that's affected, then you can also look at major bodily functions. Okay. And these are the major bodily functions, okay? And again, you can see where nurses would come in on all of this, okay? Because who better to talk about bowel and bladder issues and circulatory, endocrine, and even the reproductive. So, this probably is not going to happen so much in school, but in a job, you can't discriminate people, again, for reproductive status, okay? And again, it's not an exhaustive list. So if you can think of any other bodily function out there that's not on the list, go for it. Okay? And then it only needs to substantially limit one major life activity. Okay? So you just have to get something on that list or any other creative thing you can come up with that as a nurse you know is a bodily function or a major life activity, and then you could do it. Okay? And then it's considered disability. Yep. Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah. Yep. Her question was, would a pregnant teen? Yes. Because that would be a reproductive system. Mm-hmm. Okay. Now, mitigating measures, and this is something that I wanted to explain, okay? And this is what's different in the 209 law, okay? Is that before, if you had something that you could do to take away that disability, then you weren't disabled. We could discriminate against you. We didn't have to do anything special for you because, if you used crutches or you used whatever, you could, access the building or something like that. Now they're saying, no, you can't do that, okay? And I'm not going to say this because I'm going to go on the thing with ameliorate. Okay, so anyways, that's the definition for that. And again, what is considered a mitigating measure is not defined in law, but they do provide a non-exhaustive list, okay? And here's the non-exhaustive list, and I put it down for you because you'll never remember it, okay? Medication, I underline that, okay? Because again, that's something that, if a student's on medication and it makes them better, doesn't matter. We have to think about the disability without them being on medication. Okay? The only thing that is included is if you wear just regular glasses or contacts. But if you have some like high vision goggles or something, like some students that might need some really major vision type changes, then that's a mitigating measure. Okay? Cochlear implants. Okay? You can say, okay, well the kid, he used to be hearing impaired, but now he has a cochlear implant, he can hear just fine. You'd have to think about what he would be like if he didn't have that cochlear implant. Okay, oxygen. This is, again, one of the things here that people don't always think about is the learned behavioral or adaptive neurological modifications. Okay, so again, you're thinking about some of those kids that might have anxiety disorders or, again, ADHD type thing. So if they've learned some adaptive behavior, so I gave some examples. Here's something new too, is that, again, if you have the auxiliary aids, because it talks about that, again, that's interpreters, those are devices, all the things that like the vision impairment. We have a bunch of assistive technology things in our school district, so you can't consider those things if they're using, Alpha Smart or something like that. You'd have to think about how would they function in the classroom or in the school without those type of things. Okay, so here's my example. So again, the student with ADHD has to be considered what he would be viewed if he wasn't on Ritalin. The hearing impaired has to be viewed on how they would without their interpreter. The diabetes, how would they function in the classroom if they didn't have their medicine, the insulin? The learned behavioral adaptive would be, again, the ADHD student does great because he's learned to take extra time. He's getting up, he gets to use a bouncy ball, some of those type of things. Then you're going to have to think about, okay, if he didn't use the bouncy ball, if we didn't let him get up, if he didn't have the breaks, if he wasn't on his ADHD medication, would he be qualified? Would he be disabled? Would he be handicapped? So you have to think about that when you define that. Now, we spent a lot of time going this, and one of the interesting things in the last Q&A that I was reading, and that's why I added some of the things, is that they're saying, really don't spend a lot of time on this because everybody's going to qualify for a thing. And that's the sad thing, and I was talking about that as I left my building this morning. Said, the sad thing is that in our school district, we have 54% of our students who are on some health concern list that a parent has identified that there's some chronic health condition. So 54% of that, so we have 3,500 students, okay? So a little over half of those students probably would qualify for a 504 plan because they would have some kind of health condition that, even if the parent says that they have seasonal allergies, yeah, okay, or they have headaches, or they need special bathroom privileges because they have a weak bladder or whatever, or they have a, need to go to the bathroom. All those kids could qualify. So Again, you don't need a medical diagnosis, but again, each school district's going to interpret and determine if they're going to write 504 plans and who they're going to write on 504 plans. So I'm giving you this information so depending on how strict your school district is, you understand what the implications are. But again, a medical diagnosis is not doesn't mean that they automatically qualify. So again, to say in our school district that every diabetic student has a 504 plan or needs a 504 plan doesn't necessarily do that. What you would have to do is go through and answer all those questions, which again we'll talk about. If it only minorly affects them, they wouldn't qualify. It has to, but it has to substantially limit, but it only has to do one. Okay. And a substantial limit, again, no one tells you what substantial limit means. Okay. So this is kind of irritating, but NASN does do an issue brief. So if you look at that, it kind of tells you, again, what the average person in this society, and from a school district standpoint, it's a student that age. So what would a third grader nationwide, not just third graders in Beaver Dam or third graders in northern Wisconsin, third graders in southern Wisconsin, third graders in, or 10-year-old in, all over the nation in Texas and things like that. Okay, so the average student, average grade level. Okay. Then it also says that if the condition is episodic or in remission, again, it would substantially limit their major activity if it was active. So again, Crohn's disease is one of those conditions that might not affect them for a couple months, but when their Crohn's disease comes up, yes, then it substantially limits their activity or it substantially limits a bodily function. So then you have to think about that when it's active. The only thing that you don't have to consider is if it's something that's transitory that would last less than 6 months. So if it's a broken wrist, and and again, this is where you as a healthcare professional, they're going to ask you, is it going to, would it be healed in 6 months? And yes, and you may know that personally or not with your professional knowledge, or you may have to search it out and find out from the physician who's treating them or the orthopedic. Is it going to be better in 6 months? Yeah, then we don't have to necessarily qualify them as for 504 plan. Okay, so if it's going to happen, if it's going to be there less than 6 months. Okay, and this is the statement that you don't have, but you have it on your back sheet that I think is really important. Again, basically, it's saying that you're going to, if you go through the process, it's going to be very easily to define someone in need of a 504 plan. So then exactly what is it? Okay, it's part of the federal anti-discrimination law. There's no funding attached, and as Margaret was just talking about that. Okay, that's part of the problem, and that's why school districts are really upset about it when 209 came in and they thought they're going to have to do lots of 504 plans because they can see all these accommodations, things that they might have to provide for students, and they don't get any money for it. And even if you've only been here for 2 months, you know what funding means for school districts. Okay, so that's a big issue. It assures them appropriate educational services to meet their individual needs to the same extent as students without disabilities. Okay. It can consist of regular education. The supplemental services. It can consist of special education services. And it might be special education services if they also qualified for special education. But most people are going to go with that top tier and say, okay, you need special education services. We're going to do you there because there's money there, okay, and we're not going to do a 504 plan because if you have special education services in an IEP, you're protected. You're not going to be discriminated against. Some school districts will start that, and we'll talk about it next year about the process. And some people will start with a special education evaluation and then determine that they don't need special education, but they still need something, so then we'll go with a 504 determination. Appropriate education, what does that mean? Okay, this came from the OCR. Designed to meet as adequately as a non-disabled person. Do they have to get A's? No. Okay. For most students, and again, this what I've got the little numbers are the resources I use. Again, this came from OCR. Is that they should get, most of the time it means passing grades. It means advancing from grade to grade. Okay. It means that they have to be able to access. Again, think about disabilities. Can they get to the football field? Can they, do the activity? Yes, they have to be able to go on the field trip. You can't tell the student with allergies, seasonal allergies, that no, you can't go on to the Wisconsin farm field trips because we know you're going to have a lot of problems. No, you either don't. No one goes to the farm field trip, and we can't say, okay, well, we'll, just find you a special field trip that you get to go to. You can't do that, or you can't say, that the parent has to go along with the diabetic student, okay, or that and if the parent doesn't go along, then the student can't go on the field trip, okay. So those are things that you have to do. So they have to be able to access it. But it doesn't mean that you're giving them things so that they could get an advantage. You're leveling the playing field. And I know a couple years ago, at least in my school district, in my experience was a lot of parents were being told, and this is where the medical language and the educational language is different. They were being told by physicians that they should have a 504 plan or they need special education. And so parents were saying that because their student wasn't, they thought their student was a B or C student, and they thought, you know what, he's my kid. I know my kid can get A's because people in our family are really smart. So he should get A's. So that must mean that he needs a 504 plan so that you could do extra things for him so that he could get those A's. It doesn't mean that. We just have to level the playing field. Can they get their books? Can they open their books? Can they come to class? Those type of things. Okay. Okay. This is something kind of new, and as I started this, okay. Case law has indicated that students can be considered to qualify and should be evaluated by school districts even if learning is not affected. This is kind of a kicker, and I don't know, you take this home to your school districts. I haven't discussed this with my pupil services director yet because I find this very interesting. And this actually came out of something I think that the superintendents heard last year. But technically, even if it doesn't affect their learning, but it affects their bodily function or something like that, they should be protected, and school districts could, and here they're saying should, do a 504 plan. Again, knowing how busy you are, knowing how busy your teachers are, and I would have to say, even if this is going on the internet, that not every school district is going to be able to do a 504 evaluation on every student that probably could. Again, my school district is not going to do a 504 evaluation on 54% of our students, okay? We would have to, weed and sort out which ones really need to have that evaluation. Lots of times, the reason that it hasn't become an issue is because in our school district, we do a lot of accommodations, just because it's the right thing to do for the student. So we've never come push to shove. Now, if a lot of people, and we're going to talk about the system here in just a second, or how the process, if a lot of people or parents were requesting us to do 504s, yes, you have to go ahead and do the 504. But as long as accommodations are being made and you've had that discussion and you're doing things, it probably is not going to be kind of an issue. And again, the big thing is making sure that they're being able to access. That's the last part of that. Okay, so here's the process. Okay, each school, and this is what's different, is that there isn't defined paperwork. There isn't defined procedures. Okay, and you won't see that. What you'll always see is that people say that each school district designs their own process. So what you'll have to do is go back to your school districts and find out what is our process for 504. Okay. Some use the same process as IDA and say, okay, this is the form we use, this is how we're going to do it. We're going to start with a special ed referral, and then if that doesn't work, then or they don't qualify, then we might go to 504. Some will say, we'll just jump to 504. Some will say, well, might do a combination. Okay. It does say, though, the team members must be knowledgeable. It does say that they need to draw from a variety of sources, which, again, makes sense. You don't want to just have one person's opinion, one teacher's observation. Okay. It does say that those sources should be documented. It does recommend that it's written, but it's not mandatory that it's even written. Now, again, I would think most school administrators would think an oral plan would be a nightmare, that you've agreed not to discriminate against your child orally and not have it written. I don't think that would be good. And from a nursing standpoint, scares the daylights out of me. I couldn't do that. But again, there's no required format. And again, it's not DPI done. It's so they don't have a form out there that says what you need to do. In the paperwork, I've given you a couple examples of different forms. And the student stays eligible until the team decides they're no longer eligible. Okay? And there needs to be some process for reevaluation, but again, there's no timetable. A lot of school districts use the same timetable that you use for IDA. So every year you look at it, every 3 years you take even a better look at it. But that's not written anywhere. Okay. So how it works, okay, again, it can be referred by any of these people. You do give the parent notice that you're going to do a 504. There's some kind of assessment, again, with knowledgeable people with a variety of sources. The 504 team then determines if they're eligible. If they are eligible, you write the plan, kind of like the IEP process. They implement the plan, and then you're going to determine a case manager to make sure that that plan is going. Okay, so that's just the nut and dry up of the process. Okay. So again, then you have to go back, and again, what they were saying in that last slide and then the last Q&A from the government was that don't spend a lot of time doing this, but technically these are the questions that you have to ask, okay? Because you're going to probably answer very quickly yes to any of these things. Okay, do they have a physical or mental impairment? Okay, do the activities claim to be qualified as a major life activity? So again, you're thinking about those things. And then you're going to document which major life activity. Okay, so if you're in a meeting, probably these things you can briefly discuss. You're going to decide which major life activity, and again, we'll talk about the nurse's role, but this is where you might come in, very handily and say, this is how, this would affect, okay? Then, or you can say, is it a majorly bodily function, which one it is? And then you're going to say, does it substantially limit? Okay. And again, you can't use mitigating measures, so if people are saying, well, no, they're doing just fine, you have to remind them that no, without the meds, without the whatever, without the assistive technology, they'd still have a disability. So, just remind people that that's part of the law. Okay. And again, here's a definition of school nursing from NASN. Okay. And again, this is what we do, and I just underlined some of the things that would be in a 504, is again, we facilitate positive student responses. We actively collaborate with people, so it's a team approach. We provide case management services. Okay. So our role then is to interpret the health status. Okay. So all that information there, you're going to be sitting down there again, as you've heard over and over again. You're the person, probably the only person in your school district. I doubt anybody would have two school nurses. If you had them you would never have both of them at the same meeting unless it was like some major case. But you're going to be the healthcare professional there. So you're going to be helping to interpret what does that mean to those educational people. Okay? And again, you're going to answer those 3 questions for them. And again, this is where it would see the known or anticipated duration or limitation. So again, that's something that you might be able to answer better than anybody else. Okay? Because everybody else went to WebMD or Google, and Bing, found out, everything they could find out about Crohn's disease and, whatever, and they think that it's not a big issue or something. Okay? You can, again, explain the impact. You can articulate that to the team, how it's going to affect those functions. And again, these are things that the person in the IEDA didn't talk about. That's because she wasn't a nurse. But I would say that these are the things that you do for that team too. Okay? So if you're thinking about, okay, what am I supposed to do? What's my role here? Because it's not clearly defined. You all look like you're probably very experienced nurses, maybe not school nurses, but nurses. But these are the things that we bring as nurses to the team. Okay? It's just, how do I do this in a system that doesn't really understand and know the same things, because we're used to, if you're coming from a healthcare system, you're used to working and looking at somebody and saying, okay, and you got much to see in their eye, and you know what I'm talking about, and I just say Crohn's disease, and I know that you've got all this going through your mind. I say Crohn's disease to somebody else, and they, or like that's why you don't put ADHD on, because ADHD doesn't bring up the same things in a I would call them lay people, lay person's mind as it does for you. Okay. Anaphylaxis, I say anaphylaxis to somebody, they just give you this blank stare. Okay. For if I say anaphylaxis, that person's anaphylaxis, you jump, you know what you're doing. You're going to go, you're going to be helping me, you're going to be doing this. So again, that's what you're doing. It's amazing when you sit at those teams, how much you know. I precept for the UW-Madison nursing students, and it's a great experience for me because, as I tell them, I said, you don't really know, even as a new grad, they're not even graduated yet, how much different, how changed you are, how your knowledge, your brain just works differently now because you're a nurse than it did before. So as you go out and you're in your educational world, you'll be amazed, and some of you probably have already been amazed, wow, they don't think that way, because you're used to be hanging around people who think like you do. Okay? And again, you figure out how it'll help their functioning. Okay? You can then recommend things. Other things you might be doing is reviewing their record, and again, these are things that you might be doing on an IEP team. Okay, so they invite you to an IEP team. This is some of the things that you can do. You may need to do those things. Health history. You may need to obtain reports. You may not. Depends on the situation. If they're determined that they don't qualify because it wasn't a disability or didn't substantially limit, or maybe it was the thing is, when you sat down there, you really found out, what, this is only going to be in effect for two months. Okay, so they don't need a 504 plan. But we do need to do something for them. Maybe then just your health care plan might be sufficient. Okay, and a lot of school districts will sometimes use their health care plans for those accommodations. You're spelling it out, so they didn't go through that whole process. Again, for a lot of my students in Beaver Dam, we would consider this isn't a formal 504 plan. We didn't go through the process, but it does provide them the accommodations, and it's written. Okay. One of the slides at the end then. Okay. Again, if they don't qualify, this is an example of why a student wouldn't qualify. They do have asthma. It does affect their respiratory system. However, they're able to fully access. They don't really need any accommodations. They're doing just fine. Okay. Are they still protected under 504? Yes. You can't discriminate against them, but they don't really need a written 504 plan. Okay. You might have a health plan. You might make sure that they've got their meds. You might, be calling the family to make sure that their inhaler, hasn't run out. They don't necessarily need a 504 plan. Okay. Case manager, you may or may not be the case manager. Depends on, how much time you have. It depends on the condition. Some that are more educationally related, maybe the school counselor can be their manager. Again, it depends on what your process is. We're negotiating this process in our school district. And then the law does mandate that anytime there's a significant change, okay, that you have to reevaluate them. And again, nothing in the law says it has to be every year, but again, best practice might say, yeah, I should probably look at it every year. Okay, examples, what could be done. Again, these are some things that you might write in a special ed plan too, but those are things that could be done. Okay, the permission to use mechanical aids such as cell phones, because a lot of school districts don't allow their students to have cell phones. We have a student who has diabetes who mother was insistent that the student be able to use her cell phone so that she could call her herself or text her and let her mom know what her blood sugars are if she runs into trouble, rather than going down and leaving the classroom and maybe even seeing the school nurse. She can just text her mom. Okay. But if it wasn't in the 504 plan, then some teacher's going to grab her cell phone. Now, if somebody does grab her cell phone, that's the thing about 504 plans. If it's a 504 plan, it's legal protection. And if you don't follow the 504 plan, there's some things that can happen to you and to the school district. So in some respects, that's why school districts are a little hesitant to put it in a written 504 plan too, because you can get sued if you don't follow the plan. So if somebody took that cell phone away from the student and the parents, wanted to press that issue. Okay. So here's an example of food allergy. Would the student have a physical impairment? Would they answer yes to that question? Would they answer yes to the three? Okay. Let's see if I can get to my side. Yes. Okay. How about what activities would be impaired in a student with a food allergy? That's on your sheet there, but just think, what kind of activity? What would you tell somebody? If you're sitting at the meeting and they'll say, okay, what activity should we mark down that box? What would you say? Eating, okay. Speaking, might be breathing, depending on what happened. Yep, okay. Okay. How about EpiPen? Okay. No, they don't have a problem because we've got EpiPen. They're not going to die because they've got an EpiPen. No, that's a mitigating measure, okay? Or other things saying, well, no, it's not going to happen because we don't allow nuts in our school. Or we don't allow something. No, you'd have to consider that even without, okay? And then a plan. You can't exclude for field trips. You might do some science lab accommodations because of the certain chemical they're allergic to or something like that. You might, the home ec teacher does have to change her recipes, okay? And again, if you tell the home ec teacher and she does it without a 504 plan, great. But if the home ec teacher will not change her recipes and remove, peanuts and nuts from her recipes, some parent could do the, how much, 10? Oh, okay. Then the parent could push and ask for a 504 plan, and you would have to. And then if she doesn't, then you've got some trouble as far as not having happen. Okay. Example ADHD. Okay, so those are your questions. Yes? Okay, again, what activities for ADHD would you tell the people on the team to mark on the box? What I'm hearing? Concentration. Okay, thinking. Might be learning. Okay. Might be even some bodily function or something like that, as far as, sitting still or, standing or sitting in a chair. You can't sit in a chair, it keeps falling out of it. It could be something like that. And does it substantially limit? Okay. Again, you'd have to say, okay, so again, some ADHD students, even without meds, it maybe not substantially limit their concentrating. Okay. Some ADHD students, yes. Okay. And some of those really yes ones might even qualify, under special education because it's really affecting their education. And then you'd want to go that route for them. Okay. Mitigating measures then would be like the medication, a behavior plan. They're already using Alpha Smart. Okay, but you can't, consider those again. Crohn's disease. Okay. Again, depends on the student. Okay, you can't say every student with Crohn's disease it's going to be that. So you'd have to be looking at the student in front of you, the student that you're talking about, and say what is affected by them. And then you're going to have to again say, does their Crohn's disease substantially limit or not? Okay, and it may not for them. Okay, but like with Crohn's disease, because then people say, you know what, she has not left my classroom all year. And you can say, thank goodness her Crohn's disease has been under control and she's only had a couple bouts on the weekends. But when it's bad, and therefore she would be, protected, and we should be doing a 504 plan. And yes, we are going to do, flexible bathroom privileges. Yes, we're going to let her come to school late in the morning. Yes, we are going to make sure that she can. And at the high school level, you'll see a lot more people pushing to have 504 plans because, yeah, they can get up then and, when they're taking the WKCE test, okay, and leave, okay, and go to the bathroom. Okay, you can't, like other students, maybe they can't leave, but maybe for the kids with Crohn's disease, you have to do the test right by the bathroom, and maybe you have to, make the accommodation that, yes, I don't know what the security measures are. Maybe someone has to, stand in the bathroom or check out the stall, making sure there's not answers written down or, something like that. But, the student could leave. So again, sometimes at the high school level, you'll see people push for these because of that testing, or even like ACT tests and things like that. Okay. All right, so we've got about 6-7 minutes here, and then questions.
Whose decision is it with the 504 deciding who to push it? If I get, all my students' health updates, and I see one kid has seizures, one has this, and do I then go and push for a 504 if I feel that there could be problems educationally, or do I wait for teachers to tell me if there's difficulty in the classroom?
I think that would be practical is to wait to see if there's issues, because again, you could look at your list and say all of these kids could use 504 plans. You have to think about, what your resources are, both energy-wise, time-wise, other, people who are going to be on the team and that, and say, this plan that I wrote for the seizure is working fine. They're, accessing their education. Everything's going well. So, I'm not going to push for this. But if you're, and again, you're going to use your, good nursing communicative skills. Even if you have a health care plan on somebody and it's not quite working, the teacher's not following it, like they keep forgetting to send an escort with the student who has diabetes, okay? You're going to work with that soon, but if push came to shove and you could not get them, and you might even involve the principal to say, she's not doing that. If that's still not working, then you might have to say, we should really go with the 504 plan and document it and be, more specific. But I think that you have to kind of use your judgment of which students, you need to advocate in that way and which ones you can advocate for in a different way.